witnessing America as a failed social experiment.
How do we tell this story in a way that builds the kind of emotional momentum that colorblind ideology builds?
So many young brothers and sisters of the younger generation find themselves so far removed from the best of their past.
What are we going to make out of the nothing we've been given? How do you envision possibility?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special edition of The Tightrope. I'm Tricia Rose, and I'm here with my dear friend, brilliant thinker, and freedom fighter, Dr. Cornel West. Doc, how are you doing? How you feeling tonight?
Hey, well, we still trying to keep on pushing, as Curtis Mayfield says. It looks like it's getting tougher and tougher. But how you doing?
I'm doing all right. That's a good anthem to have. Curtis Mayfield keeps you definitely on point. When you think your tank is empty, he's got a little something extra.
He got a little extra something for me.
So, yeah, this is our second watch party this week. And Monday, Cornel West and I had civil rights attorney Connie Rice, who joined us to watch keynote speeches by Bernie Sanders and Michelle Obama. And we had a fantastic conversation, just really wide-ranging, and her expertise is extraordinary. So those of you who might be watching now live may want to bookmark that conversation with her. It was amazing. Tonight, we have an amazing group of people as well. We have joined by a number of very interesting guests, including Congressman Ro Khanna, the first vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Zephyr Teachout, a Bernie Sanders surrogate and Fordham University law professor, and Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker, the Green Party's nominees for president and vice president. Before we turn to the first of our guests, our tightrope style is to ask Cornel West what's on his mind. There's always something on his mind, and it's always useful, interesting, nourishing, and provocative, and challenging sometimes too. So what's going on in there today? How are you feeling? What do you want us to know? What do you want us to think about?
Well, I think we're at a moment now where we've got to really come to terms with just how low things can go in this U.S. empire, in this very fragile experiment of democracy with its imperial backdrop. And I think in many ways it's very sad that we're at a moment where you've got the neo-fascists on the one hand, the neoliberal on the other. And it looks as if at the moment within the very narrow two-party system, that's the best that the country can do. I mean, that's not an encouraging sign at all. And the need to create some kind of strong left culture, which is not just parties, but civic institutions, organizations, clubs, journals, dealing with ideas as well as forms of action, become very important. But as you and I have talked before, though, we're at a moment now where this anti-fascist coalition needs to be able to push the neo-fascist gangster out of the White House. And we can't say that enough in terms of making sure that he goes. I mean, that was the one thing I resonated with Brother Barack Obama in his speech, that when he talked about the democracy is about to collapse, that the neo-fascist forces, he didn't use the language, he just said Trump, Republican Party, tearing the democracy down. I was glad to hear him use that language. A lot of people thought it was too strong. What was your read on that, though, myself?
I did not think it was too strong at all, and I was wishing he had used some of that language a few years ago when, when he was in the White House, a certain kind of clarity around the serious threat that is going on. I just hope that it's not too little too late. I just think we've all, or many significant figures, have been relatively quiet because nobody wants to add fuel to the fire of Trump's use of social media, right? Because he is masterful at it and he redirects. And, I think a lot of people have been, relatively quiet. And I think many of the speeches have been focusing on empathy and, the affirmative process. But Bernie and Barack Obama were I think importantly, much firmer and clearer that like, look, this is kind of the beginning of the end of the world as we know it. And we need to be as serious as a heart attack, as we used to say.
No, absolutely. I mean, the irony is that in part it was the Wall Street greed that the Obama administration and the Clinton administrations and the Bush administrations helped facilitate the Pentagon militarism that's also been tearing the democracy down. So it's not as if it's just started. The process was started by Trump. It's been at work for a long time among both Democrats and Republicans. And of course, they could never say that. Brother Barack would never say that. I thought Sister AOC did a good job in her minute and a half that they gave her.
90 seconds.
90 seconds, and the Republican Colin Powell.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, these. I mean, look, organizations that are very powerful and that don't really have a threat or a challenge, they run like mafias, right? Whether they're schools or political parties. I mean, just get anybody with her base of committed followers and supporters and the people who believe strongly in the programs that she believes in, many of which are at the core of what Biden's trying to expand himself to include. They should have been eager to give her at least 2 minutes, at least another 30 seconds. And so it was it was rude. But I was going to say,
this is not right.
Yeah, one thing, Cornel, tell me, I mean, you're absolutely right. Of course, democracy was not on, in perfect form 4 years ago, and it just all of a sudden started corroding, But it does feel categorically different. I feel like what has happened slowly over time, largely due to the ways in which I think conservative think tanks, ideologues, and actors have disrupted and devalued democratic institutions and encouraged people to believe that democratic institutions are their problem. And I feel like that, of course, has been going on a long time. And of course, democracy's always been limited and problematic and non-inclusive and obviously reserved for a few over and over and over. But there's something about flowering of the efforts that to really destroy the possibility of truth, the possibility of science, the belief that there are nonpartisan actors who do things like deliver the mail and figure out how to run the postal service because we all need it, public health. This just feels categorically more extreme. I mean, Wall Street has largely been running things as how we had a Great Depression. Like, I guess that doesn't really surprise me, but I do feel like something is categorically different. Do you think that, not denying that legacy, that of continuity, is there a rupture here, right, that's meaningful and that's worth identifying?
Well, I think there certainly is. I mean, the early stages of a neo-fascist moment with its own predatory capitalist backdrop, in which there's still the rule of big money, still the rule of big military, but the more vicious demonizing of others, be they Mexicans or immigrants or Arabs or black people or indigenous people, whoever it is. See, that the neoliberals don't engage in that kind of more explicit, vicious demonizing. It's still going on in implicit ways, but you don't have that kind of ugliness. So that Trump is more raw and ugly, and you see what has been oftentimes hidden, exposed, even under neoliberal rule. So that the tone is very different. There's no doubt about that. The atmosphere set is very different. You compare Barack Obama to Donald Trump. I mean, Barack is a brilliant, poised, charismatic neoliberal who can still assassinate U.S. citizens without due process. And you see, that's a violation of rule of law. You can still drop drones on innocent folk. That's a violation of international law. But with Trump, you get know nothing, less than mediocre, explicitly xenophobic, and then have a more pervasive disregard of the law in his language as well as his actions. So there's both continuity and discontinuity there. But But there's always a test. I mean, look at our dear sister Linda. You know, you've been following this controversy. Linda Sansour has been pushed out of the Democratic Party operations because of her support of the BDS movement. And you say, well, we got to have a variety of different voices. There are going to be some people who agree with that, some people who don't. I happen to agree with her. But you got Michael Bloomberg, who's welcome. And, you know, he can be cast as anti-Palestinian as they come. We're going to say, well, look, we're looking for people who have a variety of different views, no doubt about that. But if that's the case, then you ought to have somebody like Linda, who is not anti-Jewish at all. She's anti-occupation. You know, she's anti-domination. She gets pushed out, but Bloomberg and Kasich and all the other folk get embraced. And see, this is going to be a challenge. This is going to be a challenge, I'm telling you.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Very much so.
Well, we're very lucky to have two people who are trying to push open the doors of the tent and to produce more diversity of position and you know, to create the kind of conversation you're talking about. So, in fact, as some people watching may have not noticed, there are two women of color running for vice president this year. Before Kamala Harris was announced as Biden's running mate, there was Angela Walker, who is perhaps the coolest socialist truck driver in the country. And we'll get to that. But in addition to her full-time job during the day, she's campaigning as the Green Party's vice presidential nominee, and she joins us tonight with her running mate, Howie Hawkins. Angela, Howie, how are you? And welcome to the Tightrope.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you here. So we said a little bit about Angela's day job, and we've been hearing all week about Joe Biden's background. But tell us who you are, and you know, tell our listening audience, you know, more about yourselves each. Let's start with Angela.
Well, thank you. My name is Angela Walker. I am originally a native of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Currently living in Florence, South Carolina, where I am much happier. I am a truck driver. I've been a commercial driver for almost 20 years. Before I moved here, I served as the legislative director for the Amalgamated Transit Union, Local 998 in my home state, and ran against former Sheriff David Clark in Milwaukee County as an independent socialist in 2014. Our campaign pulled 20% of that vote, shocking everyone, myself included, but, you know, broke socialist, unknown. And it got the attention of the Socialist Party of the U.S. And in 2016, I ran as their vice presidential nominee, actually making history this year as the first person to be nominated twice by the Socialist Party of the U.S. For vice president.
Wow. That's amazing. 20% is, I mean, that's good. That's fantastic. And Howie, tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Well, I'm a retired Teamster. I did construction work before that, but that was to pay the bills. I've been an activist since the 1960s. I came up in the San Francisco Bay Area where there was movements going on, civil rights and anti-Vietnam War, the early ecology movement. And I concluded back then, I asked the same question John Lewis asked at the March on Mars in 1963. I asked it in 1964, where is my party? The two parties were dragging on civil rights. And the next year, they both went into Vietnam and escalated that war radically. So I'm saying, where's my party? And my party first was the Peace and Freedom Party in 1968. And I supported the People's Party and the Citizens Party. And when we got a Green Party meeting together in 1984, first national organizing meeting, I was there. And I've been involved in this effort ever since. And the Greens in New York have run me for governor 3 times. Each time we got enough votes to get a ballot line for the next 4 years. And I've run for city council. I mean, our emphasis is trying to build this party from the bottom up. So I ran for city council several times in Syracuse, New York, where I'm from. First time I ran, it was a 1.5%, 1993. Almost got elected in 2011. I got 48%.
Wow.
So we built a base, and that's the goal of this campaign, to get ballot lines so we can run local candidates. And we want to begin electing thousands of Greens and Socialists to local office all across the country, get a foothold in government at that level, and build up in the state legislatures and Congress. and have a left in this country. Without a left, the Democrats move to the right. They accommodate neo-fascism. Carter or Clinton called it triangulation. And that's why the whole spectrum has moved to the right. We need a left. That's really what our campaign is. We're trying to build a movement here.
Right. Well, we're going to need to toss to Cory Booker pretty soon, but Cornel, go ahead and, keep us moving.
Cory needs to be here now. He be part of this dialogue.
You need
push
some.
Our brother. We can push our brother, because I think it's fairly clear to many of us that the Green Party is much more of a truth-telling party than any of the other parties that we know. Now, we've got the People's Party on the way, with Brother Nick Brown and others, and I'm going to be there with him as well. But the real challenge is, how do you translate the kind of truth-telling that you all do in the Green Party on the ground to get the kind of traction such that you not just have broad appeal, but you become a social force that has to be dealt with, even in this moment in which neo-fascism is so growing. Let me put it that way. It's growing.
Yeah.
Well, I would say in this election, the question is, how are you going to vote against Trump? If you're a socialist or a progressive, you give your vote to Biden, you just voted against Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, deep military spending cuts, taking on this new nuclear arms race. You get lost in the sauce. They don't know you're a socialist. And if you vote for Biden, you voted for Biden, the neoliberal hawk. You vote for the Greens, everybody understands what that vote means. And the more votes we get, the less likely the left is going to be taken for granted. Whoever gets elected, and they'll have to deal with us.
So are you suggesting there's no danger in ending up with Trump in that scenario, and or that there's no difference, or that it really wouldn't make any difference?
Well, certainly in a state like New York or California, where Trump is down, like in New York, 25 points consistently since the spring, there the question is real clear.
Right.
Where it's close, look at the national outcomes, what it looks like. Right now, Trump is way behind, including in the battleground states. So, people can make that calculation when the vote comes. But I'm saying, if you want a left, you gotta give it some support. If you don't, you're not going to have a left. People think it's too marginal. It's not there. So we got to settle for neoliberalism. And that's not what the people need.
Yeah. Sister Angela, do you want to jump in on what you say?
Just to add to that, at this point, people have been very vocal about the policies that they are most interested in having, Medicare for all being one of those, marijuana decriminalization and legalization being another one. And it just seems to me that for a major political party to be able to, they've heard these demands and are still choosing to ignore them and demanding essentially that because they're not the other guy, we're less bad, even though we're not going to give you what you want, you still, you should still show up and support us. I think that that's arrogant. I think that certain segments of the population, our vote has been taken for granted way too long. And I think that, of course, to answer your question, Tricia, there's always a danger of the incumbent retaining office, which we can agree nobody wants. But at the same time, we've been kicking the can down the road. It's always too risky to support what you actually believe in. At some point, you're going to have to pull a pin. You're going to have to jump.
Yeah, but I don't see pulling that pin now. I have to say. That Trump, you are right. I used to say that when it was what I would call the previous iteration of relatively civilized Republican neo-fascists. But this, it does feel categorically different. But I get your point is very well taken. Very well taken. Would you think that we would be in the same scenario had Bernie been the Democratic nominee? In other words, how would you position yourself vis-a-vis that potential outcome?
Well, we'd still have issues. Military spending, the new nuclear arms race, support for Palestinian rights. BDS, that's what got Linda Sarsour thrown out, I guess. Bernie wasn't for that. And we don't want the left to be taken for granted. I think what you have happen in the Democratic Party is they let progressives make speeches, but the corporate Democrats make the decisions. And to remain a player in the Democratic Party, people like Bernie Sanders make compromises. And I was surprised when he said to Ali Velshi on MSNBC, I'm compromising on Medicare for all. I'll go with Biden, 55 and older and the children, but in between, we're going to have the ACA and a public option to buy into Medicare, which is the public option is more expensive than Medicare. I mean, that was the program of the other Democrats running, and Bernie's adapted to that. And so that undermines, when you want Medicare for all, Bernie's now legitimizing a retreat, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
But it's true that anytime you're dealing with the treacherous terrain of politics in which big money and big military have already colonized it, that some kind of decisions are going to be made that have to do with concessions you get rather than just caving in. Because you're right. I mean, the corporate wing of the Democratic Party, for the most part, have caved in. But you're struggling for concessions. How do you come to terms with this struggling for concessions when, as a Green Party, and of course, I do want to invoke my dear brother Bruce, who was one of the great visionary thinkers in the last 50 years, who was a member of the Green Party. But how do you talk about concessions on the one hand, and on the other hand, hold on to your principles and your vision and your ideals? Because if all concessions are compromised, then you have no politics at all.
Well, I think when we run is on our own platform and make the politicians come to us, we get concessions. I'll give you an example. 2014. Andrew Cuomo was first challenged by a guest you're going to have on tonight, Zephyr Teachout, in the primary. She got about 190,000 votes. And then I ran in the general, and we had some of the same demands, like a ban on fracking and a $15 minimum wage. And in that general election, I came up with 5% of the vote. And that was the year Andrew Cuomo wanted to run up the vote, get ready to run for president, get more votes than his father, Mario Cuomo, ever got, get more votes when he was first elected in 2010, and he got less. He couldn't take us for granted. And after that election, he adopted several policies he had never supported before that we had campaigned on. The ban on fracking, a $15 minimum wage, a millionaire's tax, paid family leave. And that's what happens when we stand our ground and make the politicians come to us, particularly when some of these demands have majority support, like Medicare for all. Absolutely. So I think you're better off telling the politicians what you want with your vote than just giving it away, and they're going to do what they want and take you for granted, ignore you. Mm-hmm. So we do have leverage. We don't have to win the office to change the calculation of the politicians in office.
So you got concessions on both sides. The people themselves getting concessions from capital, from the bosses, from the ruling classes, and then the ruling classes themselves having to make concessions when the people themselves bring power and pressure to bear. You're saying it's a mutual two-sided street in that regard.
Well, in elections, I think you stand for what you want. If you're like collective bargaining with the boss, at some point you got to decide whether you want to stay out on strike or go out on strike, or whether you're going to accept the offer and what concessions you got. And then the members, they vote. We're going to accept this contract, or we're going to keep fighting. And so, inevitably you end up in situations like that. And then, you don't get everything, but you get the best you can.
Yeah, because that's in this moment, last time I was with Sister Jill, and I would do it again. I was with Brother Ralph, I would do it again. But when one's heart is actually with what you all stand for, and you're in a moment where the fascism is so intense.
Cornel, I'm so sorry. They want us to cut to the convention very quickly and watch this tribute to John Lewis.
Oh, okay. We'll
Sorry
come back.
about that, Cornel.
No. That's cool.
John Lewis had the respect of everybody because he was the one who demonstrated the most courage. He'd been beaten and knocked down and get up and go to find another battle. John was focused on ending voter suppression, and it wasn't that he was a great orator, it's that he was a great spirit. The power of spirituality and humility, and the willingness to suffer rather than to inflict suffering.
One of the things that John has taught us is that, yeah, you may have to sacrifice, but if you're sacrificing for a cause, something bigger than you, and you really believe in it, then you will have people following you.
If we do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress, we will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham.
I think he is the singular figure that has tried to carry out the work of our nonviolent campaigns into the halls of Congress.
From day one, John Lewis was a role model for the members of Congress, whether they were freshmen or here a long time, because he brought with him a kind of heft, a weightiness of purpose.
I got arrested a few times during the 60s. 40 times. And since I've been in Congress, another 5 times. The means by which we struggle must be consistent with the end we seek.
Someone who has navigated thorny issues of policy, not by castigating alone, but by also encouraging people to be better than they think they can be.
Today we are considering a fair housing measure which not only protects our nation's minorities, but it protects the needs of those with disabilities and families with children. How long do we have to wait before we decide to ban assault weapons? We have another opportunity to bring more of our citizens into political participation. I have on my marching shoes. That's right. I'm fired up. I'm ready to march.
And all of these decades later, while he and others of his generation achieved much, we're still fighting against police brutality and fighting for our voting rights. And so we best honor him by continuing to fight the good fights that he fought, by staying in good trouble.
But we want to give Howie and Angela a little time. So let's come back to Howie and Angela so that we don't lose them for the night. I think, Cornel, you were asking a question. Do you happen to remember? I know that was a lot of distraction there.
Oh, Lord, exactly. God, I forgot. The Sister Angela and Brother Howie, remember what I was talking about?
I think it was about the concessions. We were talking about concessions.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was talking about my own situation in which so much of my heart is with Sister Angela and Brother Howie and how it was with Jill or Ralph in the past. And yet this time with the neo-fascism coming so intensely, especially on poor and working people, that it's hard not to cast a vote for a milquetoast, mediocre neoliberal like Biden, to push Trump out, and then to try to hope that we can intensify a critique and a creation of a party outside of the two-party system once the fascist is gone. Now, I mean, that's my particular analysis at the moment, and that's where I do have some differences with my dear Brother Howie and Sister Angela. and yet I can understand their argument, their praxis.
Yeah. Howie, Angela, did you want to follow up?
And I mean, we've had this, I've had this conversation. My
100
grandmother is, well, my grandma's 80. I mean, you're not going to tell your grandma, you're going to go vote for, I'm your granddaughter, you should show up and vote for me. I'm not going to do that. I mean, I understand exactly why people are afraid. They're concerned, they're reluctant, and I get it. And you don't castigate people for feeling what they're feeling about the timeline that we're living in. This is harsh. It's frightening. Yes. The implications of someone like this individual that is currently occupying the White House, continuing to occupy the White House, are very frightening. And at the same time, as y'all mentioned, when at the top of the show, these conditions are not new to us. And in certain of our communities, this has been our reality for a very, very long time. And so I understand the need to be cautious. But once you elect the less bad, and we have seen this, elect the less bad individual to office, where is their incentive to do what you want them to do? You've given them your vote. They have their place. And if the policies that you want going in are not in their platform to begin with, where is your leverage to make them all of a sudden adopt those policies? What leverage do you have? Your voice is your vote. Unless, I'm not, not talking about the folks in the street who are really the ones that get anything done in the first place. I would argue that activists and organizers are the reason that we've ever gained anything. But when do you stop conceding? And one of the good things for me about being on the left is I'm not beholden to anybody about what I say, what I stand on. It's either, this is our truth. And if you're not with it, then you're not with it. I'm not going to castigate anybody for it, but I'm digging my heels in and I'm not backing down either.
I think the issue is, how do we fight the right? We get Trump and, his cronies out of there, but the fascists are still there. They've always been there. These are the Dixiecrats. These are the Goldwater Republicans that mobilized the white backlash. And, when they marched on Washington, John Lewis and them, their analysis, from A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin, leaders in the Socialist Party, and the organizers of that march were the Yitzhals, the Young People's Socialist League. And they pulled that together. And their analysis was, we need to win, as we move from civil rights to human rights, as they put it, economic human rights for everybody, to undercut this white backlash. And that was the Economic Bill of Rights: to a job, a guaranteed income above poverty, a housing program so everybody was housed and so forth, and getting out of Vietnam and putting that money into what the people need. And the Democrats had a majority in both houses in that period. They had Lyndon Johnson in the presidency, and they didn't pass that Economic Bill of Rights, which Roosevelt had first brought up in his last two State of the Union addresses, 1944 and 1945. And because we didn't win that Economic Bill of Rights back then, the white backlash is now in the White House. And their Democrats, think of Clinton when he brought out his law and order program running for president. He went to Stone Mountain, spiritual home of the Ku Klux Klan, with a bunch of prisoners behind him, mostly Black. You know what the message there was? Like you said, the neoliberals are more subtle, but the imagery was real clear. I mean, Donald Trump would have loved that as a photo op. So we can't rely on the Democrats to fight the right. They accommodate them, triangulation and all that. So, the classic case was the socialists in Germany backed a conservative to stop Hitler. Conservative won and appointed Hitler as the chancellor. And so you get behind the lesser evil, it just opens the door to greater evils. We need to stand for what we stand for.
Yeah. Well, we're so grateful to have both of you here. I mean, it's important. This is at the heart of what we need to be tussling about. It's not about Biden per se. It's about the entire process and what options we have and how to leverage them and how to hold on, as Angela said, and when to dig your heels in, how to dig your heels in, and how to allow for people to have different points of view, as all of us have said at one point or another here. Thank you so much for joining us on the Tightrope tonight. And we really appreciate it. And we hope to see you soon. I know Cornel wants to say his so longs.
Well, one, I'm just so glad to not just have your voices here, but have people recognize that you all are part of the great tradition in this empire of fighting for freedom and justice. Long distance runners, you all have been in your own distinctive ways. I know Brother Howie, he's got to be one of the more long distance runners when it comes to freedom fighting, going all the way back. So you got to go to somebody like Bob Ovakian in terms of a long distance revolutionary. I might have a lot of disagreements with that brother, but he's been at it a long time. Howie's the same way. Sister Angela, you were younger, very wise, part of the same tradition, same struggle for freedom, and we will be seeing each other on the streets, hitting the jails, telling the truth. Because the Green Party, my comrades, fellow freedom fighters, we might agree on this particular strategy, but at the deepest level, the truths that you all are telling need to be heard in this nation. And that's one of the reasons why we are blessed to have you all on this show.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you very much.
All right. Y'all take good care now.
You be safe out there.
Yes, indeed.
Yep.
Yeah. Definitely. No, those are two
so
wonderful, wonderful.
So we this is interesting. I mean, it's true. As soon as Angela said, we've been voting for the least problematic one all along. I'm like, yeah, but this one's the worst.
no, exactly. Exactly. And then the point she made of her precious grandmother, it's true. Right. Within our own families and communities, you have folk who are saying, I don't want to take this risk of being able to follow through fully on what my ideals are within the context of politics. We got to push the fascists out. And I just love how she worked that in terms of the dignity of her grandmother and the respect, even as she's strong in terms of her disagreement with her beloved grandmother.
Exactly. And, I think what I would have said, but we went to the John Lewis tribute was, I think the best place to do that kind of intervention on the Green Party is on the ground, right? Local election where you can really build. You can't just this presidential bid. It only dilutes what is not the far right. It never dilutes the far right. So there's just too much tension, and there's so much corruption in terms of voter suppression that you really can't afford. I mean, a couple votes. I mean, Trump won by a couple of electoral votes. He didn't even win by any popular votes.
That's true.
I mean, it's just a little frightening. I guess I'm also feeling a little more optimistic. I'd love to hear your thoughts while we wait for Cory Booker. I guess they're running a little late. But do you think we have a chance a greater chance to push the Democratic Party in a more progressive way and direction right now? It feels like the progressive elements of the younger progressives in the Democratic Party feel stronger. They feel like they have a clearer vision, and I feel like people are more attentive to some of those constituencies in the party than they have before.
I think that is the case in a broader sense. When you look at the convention, though, you really don't see the voices of the squad. You really don't see any serious engagement of foreign policy and militarism. You really don't see any attempts to talk about poverty the way William Barber or Sister Thea Harris would. So that I think the dynamic on the ground is probably very different than the spectacle here at the convention. But the spectacle still makes a difference in terms of sending messages.
Yeah, it's sending a message called, we don't want to hear no dissent.
Exactly.
No, but because they're like, look, if we lose this, if we can't beat Trump, what is our purpose? And that's a fair question.
No, that's real. That's very real.
If you can't gather up all these people of color and all these liberals and all these pissed off white women who half voted for him last time and now regret it. I mean, if you can't galvanize something for that incredibly shock and outraged constituency, who can you win against?
Who can you win against? But here the responsibility falls back on the Democratic Party. You see, what the Democratic Party in the past often does is they say, we throw out a mediocre candidate and the left and the progressives didn't get excited enough, or too many voted for Green, and therefore it's their fault. But
yeah,
here
right.
We are weak and feeble, and somehow we got the power to determine the president, and we take full responsibility when Trump beats Clinton, for example.
Right,
and you say,
exactly.
no, you got to produce a candidate that can generate excitement and enthusiasm. And when we did get a candidate with Bernie, you didn't really treat him even fairly. You see what I mean? So they've got to take some responsibility. Now, I know people will say, well, even raising these issues makes us weaker. No, we got to get Trump out of the White House. The neo-fascists must be pushed out democratically. Absolutely. That's why we're voting for him. But we're not naive, and we're certainly not going to somehow not speak certain truths that we feel deep down in our souls, because this is not just about the Democratic Party. This is about pushing the fascists out and having some serious leaders come in and speak to some deep issues.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I also think, to drill down on the pushing the fascist out, it's also about knowing that, if we're going to be basically in the middle of a constant war with, grenades and flashlights and, sound grenades, you can't even begin to organize properly, right? If you can have that a little quieter of a neoliberal environment, even better.
At least you can raise your voice without necessarily.
Exactly, raise your voice without going half deaf and being cut down in the streets.
Right. No, that's true.
So I just got word, Cornel, that our next guest, Ro, is here, Ro Khanna, and
Brother Ro,
he only has till 10 p.m. So maybe we should chat with him a little bit since Cory Booker's running a little late.
Absolutely.
Hey,
Brother Ro.
Hello.
How are you?
What a
Can
blessing
you hear
to
us?
set eyes on this, brother.
I can hear you. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
We can't really hear you.
Let me see if.
All right, we're working on it. I hear.
No,
we're so happy to have you, Ro.
Ro is a delight. I'm telling you.
Yes,
it's my pleasure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh yes.
Fantastic.
Wonderful. Well, it's what a pleasure to be on. I heard some of the discussion, and I always learn from Brother West. He's a true teacher, so at heart, and it's an honor to be on with both of you.
Yes, it is absolutely true.
Because you are one of the exemplars of courage and integrity in the House, though, brother. I'm telling you, that stand that you took in terms of refusing to the sign because Medicare for all was not there. Yes, you support the candidate. Yes, we got to push Trump out. Yes, I've got the kind of support with Biden that's going to be intense. But at the same time, I've got my principles. You've done the same thing with Saudi Arabia and Yemen. You've done the same thing in so many different instances. And you should know that, we see that. We watch you and we celebrate that kind of courageous witness, though, brother.
Well, I appreciate that, brother. So I think what you were talking about earlier, it's a missed opportunity for the Democrats in this convention not to have the Jamal Bowmans and the AOCs and the Ayanna Presleys and Rashida Tlaibs and Ilhan Omars and Mondaire Jones, the people who can excite young progressives out there. It's mind-boggling to me. I mean, on the one hand, they're saying we want young progressives to vote. And so they say to me, well, don't you think Bernie Sanders' folks will vote for us? I said, yeah, if you get someone in the ballot box, if you get someone to mail in the ballot, I think they'll vote for Biden. They're certainly not going to vote for Trump. And I think they'll probably vote most likely for Biden. But the question is, how are you going to get them out there? And the way you get them out there is to engage these folks. And they're not really giving them a voice.
Yeah.
That's right.
Why do you think that they were so reluctant to include these progressive young people who are so charismatic if nothing else, just to have them in the convention? I mean, it seems there's nothing to lose there. Is there something to lose that we're not aware of?
Well, it's the same thinking. They fear they're going to be labeled socialist, radical, terrorist sympathizing, and that the party is going to be labeled extreme left. Now, here's the irony. Trump is labeling us that anyway.
Right.
So we might as well, if they're going to label us that and we're going to have to push back through the lies, we might as well have our best team out there to at least get the turnout on our side. Instead, we always get the hits. It doesn't diminish just because we put John Kasich up there doesn't mean that suddenly they're going to stop calling us socialist radical left. They're still going to call us that, but now we don't have the counter mobilization. So I think it's just poor politics. And then you put in people who, made bad decisions to get us into wars. I'm not criticizing them personally, but is that the face of sort of the modern party that's going to inspire young people to come out? It's not. And it used to be that maybe we didn't have the talent, but we've got 10, 15 people. You can even put them all on stage at one time if you don't want to have too many individual slots.
Yeah. That's really
so true.
interesting.
That's true. I mean, I think one of the signs of hope of the Democratic Party, and as you know, I don't have a whole lot of hope for the Democratic Party in many ways, because that corporate wing is quite powerful, but that progressive wing is still there. And for someone like yourself to be more and more the face of the party, the way the squad could be more and more the face of the party, what are the chances of that?
I think they're good in terms of every cycle they get better. We won some big races this time. The Justice Democrats won races with Jamal Bowman and Mondaire Jones and Cori Bush in Missouri. I mean, incredible odds. So I think in the House we're going to have a increasingly progressive contingent. And the good thing is they're all so savvy in social media, and they know the social influencers, and they have huge reach. Brother West, because you were right at every moment. I mean, Bernie Sanders came very, very close.
After Nevada, so, we were together out there. After Nevada, we thought we were ready to walk to the White House. I said, we are going to win this thing.
And the fact that we would have had you and Reverend Barber and others speaking at the convention, and I still don't understand. Not because I'm biased, but why wouldn't you want, I'm obviously biased with you, Dr. West, but why wouldn't you want also Reverend Barber leading the Poor People's Campaign? I mean, why wouldn't you want him there? I think we conflate story with policy. And that is, Dr. West knows my personal story. He knows that my grandfather was an influence and spent 4 years in jail with Gandhi. But if you just had me give a speech saying, my grandfather was in jail and spent 4 years with Gandhi, and then I was not talking about ending wars or dealing with poverty and didn't have the voting record, people would say, okay, that's interesting the first time, second time, but what do you stand for, right? And I think we've got to have the personal story is important, but then we've got to have the what do you stand for? What is your policy on military budgets being bloated? What is your policy on the nuclear modernization? What is your policy on standing up for Palestinian human rights and other human rights around the world?
Yeah. Yes. Wow. Okay. I hope you can stay a couple of minutes with us. We got Cory Booker. We're going to listen to it and take everybody's opinions about it.
UAW and got a job on the assembly lines during World War II. That union job enabled him to support his family, raise my mom, and send her to Fisk University. That's the American dream. Together we work, together we rise. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris know the dignity of all working Americans. They know the urgency and the demand of our dream. But working people are under attack. The wealth gap grows, our middle class shrinks, and poverty persists. Last week, Donald Trump said, and I quote, "Our economy is doing good." While 40 million Americans are at risk of losing their homes, 30 million aren't getting enough to eat, and 5.4 million people have lost their health care because of this crisis. He has failed us. But still, I believe in the dream of our ancestors. Together with Joe and Kamala in the White House, we'll raise the minimum wage so no one who works a full-time job in America lives in poverty. Together, we'll fight for those who keep us healthy, who keep us safe, who teach our children. We'll stand for those who cook and serve and clean, who plant and harvest, who pack, and always those who deliver, whose hands are thick with calluses, like my granddad's were, who lifted me high, who held mine when I was a boy. If he was alive, Joe and Kamala, he would be so proud of you. And he'd tell us, take another by the hand and another, and let's get to work. This dream ain't free, you gotta work for it. So like his generation, up and out of the Depression, let's now work together and stand together. And America, together, we will rise.
This is my team. You guys build America, not Wall Street. Unions build America.
That's right. All right. Okay. So Cory Booker, anybody want to pipe in here with some immediate reflections? Ro, I know you may have to go soon, so why don't we start with you?
Well, look, I know, like Cory, and I think at least, I mean, he's talking about the economic issues. I mean, I wish, we talk not just about increasing the minimum wage, but having a livable wage above $15 and talking about, the worker productivity in this country has increased, 80% over the last 30 years, and wages have been flat. But I think he talked about some of the economic issues. He talked about poverty. I think that's one of the first times I've heard that mentioned. So that's the right direction.
Yeah.
No, I think Brother Ro hit the nail on the head. I was glad to hear him even mention poverty. At least we get a moment of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer, Rabbi Heschel, and the others. But we at the same time, you just wonder, whether that's going to be heard the way it ought at the higher echelons of the Biden team. Now, we all know, we're going to vote for Biden. We're going to push him across the line, but we're going to be truth tellers and justice seekers even when we do that. I was glad to at least hear him refer to poverty. But it's true. Cory is, of course, my very dear brother. I've known him for over 25 years, and he pushes me and I push him. But what was your read, Sister Tricia?
Yeah, no, I agree with both of you. And I think it's right on point what Rose said about, both poverty and, the losses. I guess one of the things that came to mind in addition to these insights you both offered was there's this earnest sort of emotionally, I don't want to use a negative word, a little bit maudlin. There's this emotional intensity to almost every major speech that I've seen in the last couple nights. And so, he's saying these very important things that could have these very sharp political consequences, but they're almost a sort of an ad. You can see his grandfather's hands and holding each other's hands and so on and so forth. And I'm not against that, but I would like a little more fire from somebody. So I think I just felt like, we're talking about suffering that could be articulated a little more sharply. And I guess that relates to something I wanted to ask Ro, which is, when you said we're constantly, trying to hide the progressives so that the right wing and Trump don't attack, and they're going to attack anyway. Do you also think that the Democrats are sort of soft pedaling everything so that we don't look too aggressive? Because it almost feels like they're afraid to give some ammunition to Trump, because everybody feels so emotionally on the surface in every speech. Is that a reasonable or a not reasonable way of thinking about what they might be doing?
I think that's right. And I think, there are committees that check these speeches. It's not like, Cory Booker or others can just write what they want and say it. So they have to be writing them within the constraints. The challenge is that people voted in 16 for change because of a frustration with failed policies of 30 years. Now they voted for a snake oil salesman who's made the situation worse. But we can't come back to these folks and say, okay, we just want to go back to how things were, because they've been voting for change since the beginning of the century. we have to say concretely, what are the policies that are going to make your life better? And people say, oh, you can't be wonky in the policies. It's not about being wonky. It's about telling people, here's what we're going to do to make your life better. And, you know, one of the things I admired about Bernie Sanders when he was on the trail is he would be very concrete. You know, if I'm president, you're not going to have to pay for your college. You're not going to have student loans. You're not going to have these healthcare costs. You're going to get finally $15 an hour. What are we going to do if we have power?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Indeed. I mean, and the fear is you already hear murmurings of austerity again, though. People saying, well, when Biden wins now, it looks like that we've got to make sure that we keep the debt down. We've got to make sure that we stay within the constraints. We're not going to have any kind of money the way in which we would like, and therefore we're going to make sure that the budget's not too relatively balanced. And you say, oh my God, this is like the third or fourth time you get this kind of recycled language of austerity in the face of overwhelming suffering and social misery. Now, right. I hope that's just one voice, but I mean, you wonder, these are people at the very high levels of Biden circles, and these are the same neoliberal intellectuals that we saw before, who in some way could not hit the issues of poverty strong enough, such that people were gullible to the neo-fascist gangster in the White House, you see. They were so hungry, so thirsty for an alternative. And then here he comes.
Right.
And I say this is a danger, seems to me, even as we support him.
You know, Brother West, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things I've never understood, in fact, I've raised this question in Congress, is we have a Fed that has the total authority to have monetary policy in basically printing money to buy junk bonds from corporations. They can bail out corporations. They can lend massively to banks. Well, why can't they do that to minority development institutes? Why can't they provide money to small businesses? Why can't they provide money to community banks? Why can't they provide money to ordinary Americans? When it comes to actually people getting resources, suddenly we talk about austerity. But when it comes to giving the Fed the authority to buy out corporations or junk bonds, they say, fine, take the risk, print the money. I mean, it's just total hypocrisy.
That's exactly right. That is so very true, though, brother.
Yep, definitely. True. Well, we're so delighted to have you here, and I'm so glad we were able to move to you first. If we were waiting for Cory Booker, we would have missed a lot of very important insights. And we're grateful for your courage and
I admire
insight.
both of you, and I really appreciate your voices and appreciate your letting me come on. And we will continue with the progressive movement. I mean, on the ground, I think your observation that on the ground is very different than what's on necessarily the screens. The energy is definitely still with the progressive movement.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes, indeed.
Well, brother,
you're welcome
we
back
are
anytime.
in it together. I know you on the inside of Congress and we outside, but we are in this together. And we look forward again to you to come to that class at Harvard Law School with Roberto Unger.
I love it. I'd love to do that again.
We had a great time when you were there. God bless your family, though, brother.
All right.
Thank you.
Take good care, Ro. Lovely to meet you.
Take care.
Yeah. But hey, Cornel, he's fantastic.
He's special, brother. He's special, brother. He really is.
Right.
I mean, I just wish his face were much more projected for the party, you see, because he's brilliant, he's courageous, he's got a sense of prudence and practical wisdom without being opportunistic. It's very rare to have a politician like that in these turbulent times.
So true.
Very much so.
Well, I mean, that's why, if we can get the right sort of balance between that kind of emotional intensity and the practical, right? Bernie had the practical, he's a New Yorker, he comes straight hard at you, is what we're going to do this, A, B, C, D. But you don't always feel the warmth, right? And now what I was complaining about Cory Booker, not him personally, but just the whole tone of the convention. If you could combine what Bernie brings with that emotional fire, right? And have them be a true progressive, then we're going to see a different kind of convention. And I think that's on the horizon. I think that's a real possibility because of the ranks that are swelling with more progressive and the more mainstreaming of progressive ideas.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But, I also think it's a spiritual question that for somebody like Brother Ro, that he's concerned with the real moral substance along with the prudential judgment. Whereas for a lot of the folk, you look at their record, they've moved in one direction. When they give speeches, they move in another direction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what James Baldwin calls sentimentality, the cultivation of specious emotion without any intention for execution.
And you can feel it.
And people can feel that now. Now, again, we're not talking about Corey explicitly because, Corey's a complicated brother. And he can move back and forth.
It's the tone of the whole thing.
Speaking, the whole spectacle itself.
Right.
They just so concerned. They so concerned. But what, my God, look at your records. You all haven't done a whole lot about a lot of these issues of poverty and wealth inequality and corporate power. And so you say, well, wait, what's going on here? Good God.
Right. Exactly.
And we welcome everybody no matter what, because this is so very important. But all of a sudden, Sister Linda Sasser gets pushed out based on the claims of her disagreement with the mainstream in relation to Israel and Israeli occupation. Well, we've got a lot of different folk who got different views. Bloomberg got his view. Casey's got their view. Colin Powell's got his view. He's welcome. These folk are welcome like they're insiders, and then all of a sudden Linda's pushed out.
Right.
Oh, isn't this something?
Something? They say you're welcome, except we got a long list, a deep sea scroll of exclusions, and that's fine print. It's like when you
deep sea.
Oh my goodness! So we have our next guest is actually here already. We're just rich with amazing guests. And here she is, Zephyr Teachout.
Such a great Professor Teachout, freedom fighter Teachout herself.
Yes,
hello.
Indeed.
How you doing there?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
Well, we are blessed to set eyes on you.
And how are you, Dr. Rose?
I'm doing great. I'm just happy to meet you. I've read you a long time, and I just never had a chance to chat with you. So it's a great honor. I appreciate it.
I'm so excited to get a chance to meet you, even in this way. And one of the great moments of my year was being in New Hampshire with the Dr. Truth here. On the night that Bernie won New Hampshire, and it was a very powerful night, and it was wonderful to meet you in person then too.
Yes,
very much so. But no, your work as intellectual, that new book, Break 'em Up.
That's right.
Big tech, break 'em up, break 'em up. Oh, you got it right there. That's good. That's good.
So,
absolutely.
I'm learning this. Who wrote the key thing here is, I wrote it, but
big ag,
big Bernie wrote the introduction, and it's a barn burner of an introduction too. So
tell our listeners, just give us a snapshot. What are you arguing? I mean, I can see by the title what the goal is to break them up, but walk us through some. And I got my hammer. I definitely got my hammer. It's right over here. I keep it under my desk. But no, seriously, tell us, especially for those listening, what are you arguing there, and what are you hoping we can achieve in that arena?
I mean, we know our economy's broken. We don't have a moral economy, and we don't have a functioning democracy. And we sometimes think of these in separate ways, but people are smart and they know these are deeply connected. And one of the root machines, the reasons of this deep brokenness is that we've allowed big companies to basically form a kind of private government. I use the word monopoly, but it's when private power gets so concentrated, so much capital is there, and there's so many tentacles into so many different areas that they are actually governing us. It's a kind of tyranny. And we see this in big tech. People are talking about it, where what used to be public functions are now being run by private profit-seeking companies and destroying our communications infrastructure. And they all do it in the name of tech, as if tech is somehow justifies the destruction of our public connections to each other. But it's also in ag. It's in office supplies. You see just two companies that control that. It's in airlines. It's in industry after industry. You see these little mini fiefdoms. And it's not just that they're big, and it's not just that they are spend a lot of money on lobbying. And we know they do that. And they are flush with campaign cash and lobbying cash and funding think tanks. It's also that they have a business model that is basically designed to steal from people. And one of the things I want to recover is this old idea that monopoly is a form of theft. When Jeff Bezos takes 30% of every dollar, 30% of every dollar that you spend on Amazon goes to Bezos, not to the sellers, that's just highway robbery. He isn't providing a service worth 30%. It's that sellers know if they want to survive, they have to go through Amazon. And that's the same thing that chicken farmers know. They have to go through Tyson. So they have to make poverty, live at poverty levels, and also give up their privacy. So it's a form of private government that is a major engine of inequality. It's just basically sucking money from people, but it's also sucking power. And although, Dr. Rose, you said you're right, I do want to break them up. I want to bring a hammer. The hammer is, in some cases, it's a public utility. In some cases, we should just say, break the parts apart. But part of it is also saying you can't use arbitration the way you do now. Like break these companies apart at the root of their power. And I'm speaking to progressives because I think progressives think they know this, but our activism doesn't reflect it. We're not doing enough stuff to actually, like, when is the last time you marched in the streets or sat in at the FTC saying, we need to break up these companies? Instead, we're always after the fact saying, please, Pfizer, don't charge too much, instead of we should never have allowed Pfizer to become this Goliath. Right. So those are some of the arguments.
And that's powerful stuff, though. I mean, you've been able to bring together
and
theory and
Congressman
practice.
Khanna is actually a great advocate on these issues.
Oh, yes. No, it's true. It's true. But I mean, your efforts on the ground, running for office and being able to galvanize so many everyday people and fellow citizens as you remain distinguished professor in the law school and so forth. What prospects do you see, especially at this moment, vis-a-vis Democratic Party, left formations, larger progressive cultural efforts?
Whoa, well, I used to play a lot of poker. And one of the things you learn in poker is the idea of pot odds. So it's basically, even if I look at the prospects, we're up against extraordinary amounts of concentrated power. And, it's hard right now seeing how progressives, young people don't have their really powerful truth-telling voices at the convention. Just what both of you were talking about right before I got on is big tent in theory, but then kicking out and condemning Linda Sarsour. The ways in which people who are doing incredible work to build connections in Queens and Westchester and the Bronx, these incredible grassroots young organizers working on campaigns of my friend Jamal Bowman or AOC, and they are basically told, we're going to just give you a few seconds, but all the signals are, we're going to take you for granted because we're not going. You don't have a seat at the table. The incredible failure to really engage serious questions on policing reform at the center of the convention after the incredible activism, there's all that is hard. But in terms of pot odds, if, and I hope it's when, but we've got the party structure I'm working within the Democratic Party. If we succeed in this really deep fundamental battle to say the Democratic Party should be standing up against these thieves and middlemen who are destroying wealth and value, who are sucking value out of all our communities and dividing us, if we can stand up against them and have the Democratic Party be its best self, what that means for people's lives is so worth it. So I guess it's that, the pot odds are so great, we can't stop fighting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So tell us a little bit about what you said the progressive young constituents are not in the streets sort of fighting to break up these companies. What do you think about, the seduction of big tech in sort of creating a climate where, first of all, you can't function without the technology. I mean, our internet at another place, a little beach house we have, went out, and I mean, it was just chaos. It was like, we can do nothing. And I thought, oh my God, how did I get to this point? If my iPhone crashes or my computer, I'm like, what am I going to do with myself? I don't even know how to. So, I mean, there's this tremendous, emotional investment that has been that has tethered us to certainly to big tech, not so much big agriculture, because we don't necessarily. So do you think that might be playing a role across the board to make us comfortable with these large companies because we're so dependent? I mean, Amazon in the coronavirus era, I mean, it's a lifesaver in the sense that you can get everything within 2 days without putting your life in jeopardy in the same way as you would if you had to go to 10 stores to go get the 10 things and deal with all these non-mask wearing citizens, so on and so forth.
It's such an important question. And step one, we've got a lot of work to do. So read my book, but
I'm going to definitely read your book.
But step one is that we have to understand they've convinced us, they've snookered us into thinking we can't have nice things unless they're also stealing from us. So we can have same day delivery without Jeff Bezos also owning the cloud and also having contracts with police departments and also controlling warehouses where workers are treated badly. In fact, we can have the marketplace broken up from the warehouses. It's not a very complicated thing to do once we just set our minds to it. But we've got the belief that we can only get the things that we like on their terms. And that's just not true. In fact, once we break up Amazon, like the amazing ideas of people working that are now being crushed because they think I can't make it in this top-heavy world, all of those ideas will come forward. But there's also something that I think is really important, is that I think people have bought into the idea that if they're going to condemn a private company, they're supposed to boycott it. And then, so if they hear about the incredible racist firing of Chris Smalls by Amazon, a really brave warehouse worker, and these recordings were leaked showing that Amazon's lawyers decided they would call him not smart and articulate, like clearly playing into racist tropes. In fact, they've repeatedly fired Black warehouse workers who've been fighting for basic PPE throughout the pandemic. So people hear about that, and they hear about Amazon workers pissing in garbage cans and how they're treated. And they think, but I still want to use Amazon, and therefore, how can I complain? And we've got the order wrong. I think that we have just embedded in ourselves a neoliberal idea that if you don't have standing to complain about these companies unless you remove yourself from them. And there's a real class issues with that. A lot of people really depend on Amazon. People can't get jobs or connect with their family without Facebook or Instagram. So I think there's targeted boycotts that are successful, but that we should stop saying, like, first you have to quit the thing. And our first call should be Chuck Schumer. Like, why, Schumer? Have you not been standing up about this? Why are you not talking about the incredible inequality machine that Jeff Bezos is sitting atop of? And we've seen this inequality machine during the pandemic, where Bezos is making billions and workers are basically are told to feel lucky they have a job. So I think you're right about that emotional connection, and that unlike our schools where people feel like, yeah, I love my school, but I'm going to protest it if something's wrong. There's a weird way in which people feel like, well, I need this tech, and therefore, if I touch it, the things that I need and genuinely rely on will fall apart. And so we've got a lot of work to do in breaking those walls down, or those connections down.
Yeah.
It just strikes me that you've been one of the few who've been able to have this very delicate dialectical interplay between being an insider progressive connected to outside social movements and also such a crucial intellectual. What argument do you give to people, especially young people, though, Sister Teachout, who argue that the Democratic Party, given the dominance of its corporate wing, is simply incapable of being the vehicle for the kind of progressive vision that you have?
Oh, well, as you could guess, this is not an infrequent argument. So what I have learned is that it's really important to step outside of the professor mode and just go to the human suffering that I think is caused by Trump. And believe me, the unbelievable pathologies in our society did not start with him. Absolutely not. But if you take a broken system full of inequality machines with deep structural racism that since the 70s has been basically sucking wealth out of Black communities, and then you put on top of this an incompetent bigot who is just a wrecking ball determined to get attention at all costs. The human costs are incredible. I mean, and so for me, it's just saying, okay, people are dying. And yes, I'm not saying it would have been perfect, but the response to this pandemic would not have been so grotesque. And if you know people who have been severely sick or who have died, three of my husband teaches high school physics, in the first month, three of his students' parents and grandparents passed.
Oh my God.
Like the human cost is too great. And so let's absolutely get Biden in there. But I think that when I end up doing the shoulder shaking, and I really want to hear what you say, both of you. But when I end up doing the shoulder shaking, it's about, this is not about expressing who you are. There's other ways to express who you are. And I want you to, please do. Please express your politics. Express them more. I want Schumer to know your name. But this vote, especially obviously in swing states, but this vote is not your moment of expression. And that's the way that I see it, is that this is about using power to help people and to help our communities come together. But where are you on this right now?
No, I come down with you. I just want to be a part of the anti-fascist coalition to push the neo-fascist gangster out of the White House, but to do it in such a way that I'm not telling lies or spreading illusions about who Biden is or who Kamala actually is, to be supportive enough to push him across the finish line, but recognize that the structural issues that you've talked about and foreign policy, the militarism and so forth are still part and parcel, and they go hand in hand. And that's what really makes a serious progressive movement what it is. It's not just a matter of being silent in order to support a certain kind of neoliberal politics, because the neo-fascist politics is just so ugly.
Yeah.
So
it's hard. It's hard because
it's a tightrope. It's a tightrope. Walking on the tightrope. Oh yeah.
But I mean, I think the way I see it in a couple of directions. One is that, we get caught up in the kind of spectacle of Trump and his presence. But if he has 4 more years and he can make how many more judgeship appointments, how many more, ways can he degrade the Justice Department? If he can appoint more Supreme Court justices, his legacy in terms of after death impact could be 75 years. So, I think that, he could reverse all of the efforts to end mass incarceration. Just destroy, Mexican families and Mexican American families, particularly with the southern border, and just, continue to exercise a level of brutality and to re-whitening, America, right? That the policies themselves would be about making sure that, making America white again, which is really what GREAT actually stands for. So spelled a little differently, apparently.
It's hard not to go back to Reagan and the legacies of Reagan when you talk about the legacies.
That's right. But this one has, right. So when you have the concrete legacies, the policies, the installations, right, the appointments, but then you also have this emboldening, right? You have a perfect storm of all of these profoundly vicious and reinforcing right-wing and conspiracy theorists who are energized by everything he says, how he says it. He knows exactly how to sort of nod and wink at them and sort of pretend he doesn't know them, but then say they're always good people, whichever group it is. And so we're left with them either way. We're left with them being all excited about how to be filled with rage and to assert, a violent white supremacist environment. We're stuck with them either way, but we're stuck with them much more so, right? And we had a guest on the tightrope a few weeks ago. Maybe I don't even know what week it was. It's too late at night for me. I told Doc, it's past my bedtime, so forgive me. But
2.5 hours. That's fine. I have a 2-year-old.
You seem quite spry and awake there, Zephyr. So I don't know, but
talking to you.
Well, but what I was going to say was he works in Homeland Security and FBI and other areas and works on violent extremists and says that, white right-wing extremists are the most significant threat. The FBI has said so. And yet it goes on without a discussion. So to me, it's not just about the policies. It's also about the emboldening and the nurturing of a terrorizing kind of internal force. But I wanted to ask you one thing, because we got to.
Can I feed off that for a second?
Oh, sure, please go for it.
I totally agree with you. And the piece of the puzzle that I want to connect there, which is so clearly connected with Trump, but was also true in Reagan and has also been true in voter suppression, is that there's a partnership here. There's a partnership between corporate America and the white supremacists you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And to me, one of the clearest examples of the recent partnership is when Google and all these big guys, Pfizer, AT&T, were funding ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, while it was pushing the voter suppression laws in North Carolina. While it was elevating and honoring then an unknown guy named Tom Tillis. And so there's a bargain there that these big corporations, and you can see the bargain in different ways, but this is part of the Reagan bargain. Reagan came in saying, I'm going to appeal to your whiteness. And by the way, I'm also going to radically deregulate and go total and just rip out the heart of antitrust laws. I mean, that's one of the things I've been thinking about is the Meese and Baxter and his whole California wrecking crew. They were really about overturning the civil rights movement as best they could and deregulation. And these two come together because the corporate power gets served by the inflaming white nationalism. I mean, and Facebook's algorithm is just one example of that. But I want to be clear that there's a funding mechanism here and a partnership here, and it's not always totally clear. With voter suppression, it was, but it's an important partnership.
Oh, it's a very important point, though. But you had one more question, sister.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tricia.
I wanted to. We
Yeah,
have
this
a
is such
tightrope.
This is rich dialogue.
I know. I've got 5 more questions, but I want to honor. We have a tightrope question that came in from one of our fans, who wants to know what the fantastic Zephyr Teachout thinks about co-ops, worker co-ops, and what, whether or not you think they are a viable option.
I love them. They're amazing. They're part of like the great, this great effort in the late 19th century to fight against illegitimate white power and illegitimate monopoly power. The dream of the co-op is not a new co-op, but I don't think people should beat themselves up because they keep starting co-ops and they keep failing. Because our current system is designed to make it incredibly easy for capital to organize in this concentrated monopoly form, but really hard to organize in the co-op form. So I think people often say, oh, let's start a co-op and recreate the wheel. And I've been in those conversations, and great. But if you talk to the great ag workers who worked to developing a berry co-op to compete with Driscoll, they will tell you it's working, it's functioning, we can sell our berries. But the minute Driscoll doesn't want us to exist, we won't exist. It's just they're allowing us. It's sort of, and it actually makes Driscoll look good because then they can say, look, we don't control everything. We allow these little people to do that.
Yeah.
So I just think it's like we need actually structures that allow co-ops to thrive, and people shouldn't just try to build co-ops, although that's valuable to show something. They should also say, hey, I'm not an economics expert, but state lawmaker here, change New York law so it's easier to organize in this way. So, it's like returning our focus to politics is one of my goals. What have you guys talked about co-ops on the program?
No,
not really. Not really. We know our dear brother Rick Wolf has always been talking about workers' control and workers' co-ops and so forth. We can go back to Panicoke and Gorder and talk about the centrality of council, workers' councils and so forth.
Yeah.
That Stanley Aronowitz and the others have talked about for many, many years. You know who was deeply into this was...
law. Yeah, go ahead.
You say what?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just antitrust. We need to reform corporate law and governance systems. So
Absolutely. But it's just amazing to me because I sit here and look at these two sisters, and you all represent the best of the prophetic legacy of Yale University. Both I didn't know. If Yale can produce the kind of intellectuals and freedom fighters like you all, then New Haven got a whole lot going on. I can tell you that right now.
Well,
a whole lot going on.
I appreciate that. What class were you at Yale, Zephyr?
I was 93. What about you?
Yeah, I was 84, class of 84.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you look like you graduated far more recently.
It's Zoom and makeup.
I worked every reunion, so maybe I was there when you were coming back.
Yeah, well, my husband and I, who also went to Yale, we lived in New Haven in the early 90s. So actually, we probably were in some kind of pizza line together at some point, because New Haven will always be my favorite town for WYBC radio, which has got the best black radio on the East Coast, and pizza. Yale's all right, but those other things are extremely important. What would we tell young people, right? I mean, I think of all these kids coming out of, not just elite schools, but all kinds of schools. And they, they're thrilled. They get a job at Amazon. They get a job at Google. They get a job at Microsoft. They get a job at Facebook. They get a job. And, who am I to say you shouldn't take this job? What job you going to take, right? You got to take some kind of job. They're all part of this, this big industry. And so what's the political sort of action path in terms of life choices that you would counsel your own students or any other young people to take, right? Not everybody's ready to be in the streets broke. People have families they need to help support, or they're trying to move from what has been a very fragile condition, or they're just not willing to make that sacrifice, but they have a political conscience and they're trying to figure out what is an alternative path. Have you
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it's a little like boycott, where I think we put way too much on pressure on people who have a lot of situations where they either may have to take a job or limited options. And instead we should say, okay, what are you going to do when you're there? There are some of the most exciting organizers against arbitration, which is this spooky shadow court system that let me see if I can do the Shakespeare in 30 seconds version. When you agree to take a job, you also agree that when they later discriminate against you for any given reason or violate your rights, you won't have the right to go to court, even if you have those rights on paper. You go to a private court with a judge paid for by the company. That's arbitration. Arbitration sounds nice. It sounds like the kind of thing you'd use when, like, you're going through
mediation.
Exactly. Right.
But it's not.
Arbitration is the court system of corporate America.
It's privatized. It's the privatized court system.
It's the privatized court system. So some of the best organizers against this are right now at Google. They are Google workers who are fighting against arbitration clauses, and they started by fighting against their own arbitration clauses, but they're amazing. And they're saying, no, it's not just about us, it's about all the companies that Google contracts with. And they did a huge walkout from Google where they got 10,000 employees to walk out, saying, hey, if somebody's working at the fast food that contracts with Google that is here on our campus, they shouldn't have to sign an arbitration clause. And their goal, which is the goal I think we all have to have, is for Congress to make this not okay. But you can, within your workplace, especially, if you have power in your workplace, and these are some people who have some power, they're college graduates or have master's degrees and have pretty elite jobs. If you're taking those jobs, you better use your power to speak up against abuses.
Right.
So, I mean, like, telling a student to get a job in journalism is really hard these days. What are your journalism options? So,
Cornel, what do you think of that? This sort of, from our generation, it was basically, are you a sellout? Are you going to try to make change from the inside? And boy, we debated in college, in graduate school I think I'm still having this debate somewhere. Is it, you going to make a change from the inside? Can you really change the system when you're on the inside? Then everyone else is like, man, there's no outside anyway. You can't really stay out there, and that purist vision is disabling and collapses all the options we have on the inside. So, in some ways you're saying there's no, really, you just blown that whole tension and debate up.
No, I just to be fair, I think, and I really want to hear what Dr. West has to say, but I don't think it's an irrelevant moral question for people. I think they should take it quite seriously. I guess I'm saying that if you end up working at one of these big corporations, which because there's so few, most people end up somewhere in relation, then please use your power there. But I want to walk back on saying, I don't think it's irrelevant. I think people have more power than they think. And I think a handful of people have more power than they think. So what do you, what do you tell students?
Oh, I tell students that they, well, I don't really like to tell students, I just try to say, well, this is the kind of life I attempt to lead. which is the primacy of morality and the centrality of spirituality. So that integrity, honesty, decency is something you can hold on to no matter what the context is. Just learn how to live in the midst of the tensions and the contradictions and the incongruities of that context. But the spirituality for me has to do with just empathy, vision, and imagination. So you authorize a different reality in whatever reality you find yourself. So whatever context you're in, you are set on trying to create some alternative in some way. In your individual action, you're working with groups, you're working with collectivities, you're working with movements to conceive of a different world and a different reality, different than the one in which you find yourself. So that centrality of morality, centrality of spirituality is the lens through which you view things. Then the question becomes, what kind of tools, what kind of equipment, what kind of weaponry, and so forth and so on. Because I think Sister Tricia is absolutely right. I mean, we're inside the empire.
Yeah.
And there's no way out. It's just inside. It's just like being in space and time. It's like Kafka. Everybody got a death sentence in space and time, right? Ain't no way out but the grave. So it is historically in the empire. We're in the empire. Now, the empire actually has some good things. Aretha Franklin is in the empire, too. Yes, we appreciate Aretha. Stephen Sondheim is in the empire. We appreciate Sondheim. So the question becomes, how do you use whatever in that empire in order to dismantle the structures of domination that are shot through it on all the different forms?
Right. Yeah.
Well,
Now,
I want to tell you that I have felt, I like when you look at the empire part that I'm at a law school. I know who pays the bills at a law school. It's the big, in the end, not directly.
Right. But you're helping students understand that there's a conventional law, curriculum, and then there's this what we now call the progressive shadow law curriculum. And so two can play that game, Zephyr, right?
Yes.
And you exemplified so much of the integrity, honesty, decency, and the vision of another world in light of a nightmare's reality in which we find ourselves. And that's the most that anybody can ask for anybody. You know what I mean? Yeah. You bring your precious 2-year-old and Brother Nick and the others, your family and everybody come together. You say, yes, this is a witness in the Teachout house. This is a witness in the Teachout house. This is what is going on. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, it's been so wonderful to have you. We have to have you to talk about this book some more. I'm going to get my copy tomorrow. And
I was just so honored to come on and to be part of this. And I want to stay in the conversation. And
yes, indeed. No, it's a beautiful thing. Anyway, I'm thrilled to have you, and I know Dr. West is more than delighted. It's uplifting. That illumination. That kind of illumination that makes things that you're nebulous. You're like, is it there? What's happening? That clarity is so exhilarating to me, right? That it's like, what's kind of going on, but you don't really know enough about what's going on. And so that's what I can tell. That's what this book is doing. And so I'm going to be getting it tomorrow for sure, as they say. Definitely.
Well, that's why I follow Dr. Truth, and I'll be Rose of Truth. Yes.
Yes. Dr. Truth and Dr. Teachout. We got a whole cast of characters here tonight.
That's right. We got a threesome here. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, though.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zephyr. We'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Indeed.
Yeah. She's amazing.
Well, she's incredible. She really is.
Such a positive spirit.
Yeah, her mind is so sharp, and she's got this ebullient spirit on the inside that's overflowing all the time, and yet very courageous and unflinchingly looking at just how grim our situation is.
Yeah, she's not dour. You'd think knowing all of that might bring a system down.
Exactly. No, she really is one of the grand ones in the academy, but also linked to street movements and social movements besides to be in the Democratic Party, she ran against Cuomo, and boy, she put.
That's
Cuomo
right. She got a huge percentage.
Right?
Yes,
she did.
She really put it on him. Now, what exactly happened? I think we're waiting for a transition, so we have a couple minutes. What exactly happened with the piece she wrote that Bernie had to end up apologizing about?
Oh, yeah, the piece she wrote in The Guardian in January about the corruption of Biden. Well, she was just talking about the ways in which Biden was tied to the credit card industry. And that's exactly what Elizabeth Warren was upset about when they first clashed, because Biden was, in fact, very much tied to the credit card company, and similarly so with Wall Street. So, I mean, again, Sister Teachout, Professor, she's just telling the truth. But, Bernie had to pull back because of the language of corruption. That was the thing that he didn't want to push too far, because he and Joe were so close. But I think she was actually telling the truth, to tell you the truth. I mean that was my take about it. But that's something to say that most of the Senate can be viewed as a certain form of legalized bribery and normalized corruption. That's what so much of Congress is. And it's not just Biden, it's across the board.
But that's I don't think I would disagree with that. But the problem is when everybody's corrupt, and that's the framework we use. We can't draw critical distinctions between corrupt systems that people are participating in and people who are cultivating the culture of corruption as a way of operating regardless of the system itself. You know what I mean?
That's true. That's true. That's because you still have individuals in Congress who have integrity and honesty and decency, but they're part of a culture itself, a structural reality in which the lobbyists from K Street and the others are breathing down their throats, and they have to win the next election. They've got to spend time on the phones calling this big money, or they're not going to have any money to support them in their elections. And that's the only way you survive.
That's right. Yeah, that's the only way. Yeah,
no, that's real.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't really know. It feels like it's hard to decide, just how much of an engagement we should have with this kind of political space, because part of me is like, let me just cast my vote, push these cats across the finish line, as you put it, you just get to rolling, and then just let me go take a break,
Let me get a little distance from this mess.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly
chapter
right.
17 of Machiavelli is The Prince, where he says it's better to be feared than loved. You have to be cruel. Compassion has to be pushed to the margin in order for any kind of political gains to be made. And that's Machiavelli. And you say to yourself, if that's the terrain upon which one has to spend most of one's time, then you're going to have to cultivate a spirituality that is of high quality, or your soul is going to be lost.
Entirely right. And it's not even just high quality, but it's got to be so resilient
and
so impervious.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Ooh.
Because it's just constantly, being undermined, and your own moral spirit is always being asked to give itself up for some gain, which is what your main goal in the whole arena is in the first place. I mean, that's a true contradiction right there.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
That's very, very true. No, indeed. But we have had really quite a night, though. So, I mean, Tricia, anytime we get a chance to be together, we just have a good time. That's just fundamental truth.
Yeah, it's really
Lord,
fun.
These voices coming through wrestling with these issues, you say,
Yeah, it's been a nice group of people, very interesting. And I mean, I know Zephyr's work the most, but it's great to hear. And, it's good to remind people who are watching that, all of these things I think are reassuring, that you and Zephyr drew critical distinctions between endorsing and voting, right? That the range of our political selves, our identities, our political agendas around gender, around religion, around sexual orientation, all of that, we can do all of that in 100 other arenas, and we must continue to do that. But this is a very narrow project here. This is just one, and there is a way in which that has been part of the manipulation of the two-party system, is to make us feel like our identities are wrapped up in their politics.
Right. That's right.
which they are not, right? It's really about something much more nuanced and separate from that process, but they want us to feel like we're being represented, and that's how a certain kind of fanaticism is being cultivated.
That's so true. That's very true. But it just shows the narrowness of the electoral political system and how difficult it is to pass through without feeling suffocated or boxed in, even though one has to go through that brook of fire. There's no way around it, because that's where the battle over resources take place. That's where the battle over self-understandings take place. But it's just so narrow. It's like,
So do you think we'll ever get rid of the electoral college system?
Well, that's a good question. I doubt it, because the very people who have to get rid of it still benefit from it. It's just like so many
it's like Jeff Bezos.
Like campaign reform. The very people who have to vote for campaign reform are the very ones who need
pocket
to be
full of cash.
Exactly. The money flowing out of their back pocket.
Yeah, dropping it as they leave.
Calling out of there. Exactly.
Yeah, it would be quite I think it would make a huge difference. I think the popular vote, I mean, I don't even understand the purpose, frankly, at this point. But I think the popular vote
old relic from the white supremacist days, in order for certain states, especially the southern states, to have a certain kind of weight and gravity and power.
Mm-hmm.
That is so true.
Yeah.
So is it that we're waiting for Brother Biden?
Yeah, but I think they're just about to do the intro. So let's see what they got for Joe Biden. So let's see him from the beginning. I think they're going to put him on. Oh, here he is now.
Oh, here he is.
Yeah.
Circle of trust. And then the extra gift of Ashley.
Growing up, it was full of adventure, laughter.
We do everything as a family, and we've always done everything as a family.
He was always a good, loving father. I mean, there's nothing more important to Joe than his children.
It's hard to explain how ever-present he was in our lives.
You don't have to guess what my dad believes. A great benefit of being my father is that he doesn't have to contort himself into different people at different times.
Bo was going to do fine things. I mean, he had it all. And then he got sick. The whole world tilted. And it felt like we were all falling off.
Once again, Joe faced the unimaginable.
My mother, she said, bravery resides in every heart, and someday it will be summoned.
The way he survived losing my mom and my sister, and then losing my brother, is understanding that you have to have purpose.
Every day I get up, I ask myself, I hope he's proud of me, because that's that makes me move on.
From his time in the Senate and then the White House, Joe always found a way forward, forging unlikely friendships and alliances. And time after time, he made progress possible, and always holding in his heart the struggles of his family and every family, always fighting to make his country whole.
It's a very rare quality to bring your empathy skills to the process of governing. Joe Biden never forgets that that's the point of moving the wheels of government.
He will keep his word. He will reach out and hear what other people have to say.
To have somebody who believes in what's best in us, somebody like Joe Biden who actually believes in the American idea, that's the kind of person who I want in the White House.
Good evening. Ella Baker, a giant of the civil rights movement, left us with this wisdom: give people light, and they will find the way. Give people light. Those are words for our time. The current president has cloaked American darkness for much too long. Too much anger, too much fear, too much division. Here and now, I give you my word. If you entrust me with the presidency, I will draw on the best of us, not the worst. I will be an ally of the light, not the darkness. It's time for us, for we the people, to come together. And make no mistake, united we can and will overcome this season of darkness in America. We'll choose hope over fear, facts over fiction, fairness over privilege. I'm a proud Democrat, and I'll be proud to carry the banner of our party into the general election. So it's with great honor and humility, I accept this nomination for President of the United States of America. But while I'll be a Democratic candidate, I will be an American president. I'll work hard for those who didn't support me, as hard for them as I did for those who did vote for me. That's the job of a president, to represent all of us, not just our base or our party. This is not a partisan moment. This must be an American moment. It's a moment that calls for hope and light and love, hope for our future, light to see our way forward, and love for one another. America isn't just a collection of clashing interests of red states or blue states. We're so much bigger than that. We're so much better than that. You know, nearly a century ago, Franklin Roosevelt pledged a New Deal in a time of massive unemployment, uncertainty, and fear. Stricken by a disease, stricken by a virus, FDR insisted that he would recover and prevail, and he believed America could as well. And he did, and we can as well. This campaign isn't just about winning votes. It's about winning the heart and, yes, the soul of America. Winning it for the generous among us, not the selfish. Winning it for workers who keep this country going, not just the privileged few at the top. Winning it for those communities who have known the injustice of a knee on the neck. For all the young people who have known only America being rising inequity and shrinking opportunity, they deserve the experience of America's promise. They deserve to experience it in full. You know, no generation ever knows what history will ask of it. All we can ever know is whether we're ready when that moment arrives. And now history has delivered us to one of the most difficult moments America's ever faced. Four historic crises, all at the same time. A perfect storm. The worst pandemic in over 100 years. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The most compelling call for racial justice since the 60s. And the undeniable realities and just the accelerating threats of climate change. So the question for us is simple. Are we ready? I believe we are. We must be. You know, all elections are important. But we know in our bones this one is more consequential. As many have said, America is at an inflection point. A time of real peril, but also of extraordinary possibilities. We can choose a path of becoming angrier, less hopeful, more divided, a path of shadow and suspicion, or we can choose a different path and together take this chance to heal, to reform, to unite, a path of hope and light. This is a life-changing election. This will determine what America is going to look like for a long, long time. Character is on the ballot. Compassion is on the ballot. Decency, science, democracy, they're all on the ballot. Who we are as a nation, what we stand for, and most importantly, who we want to be, that's all on the ballot. And the choice could not be more clear. No rhetoric is needed. Just judge this president on the facts. 5 million Americans infected by COVID-19. More than 170,000 Americans have died. By far the worst performance of any nation on earth. More than 50 million people have filed for unemployment this year. More than 10 million people are going to lose their health insurance this year. Nearly 1 in 6 small businesses have closed this year. And this president, if he's reelected, you know what will happen. Cases and deaths will remain far too high. More mom and pop businesses will close their doors, and this time for good. Working families will struggle to get by. And yet the wealthiest 1% will get tens of billions of dollars in new tax breaks. And the assault on the Affordable Care Act will continue until it's destroyed, taking insurance away from more than 20 million people, including more than 15 million people on Medicaid, and getting rid of the protections that President Obama worked so hard to get passed for people who have 100 million more people who have pre-existing conditions. And speaking of President Obama, a man I was honored to serve alongside for 8 years as vice president, let me take this moment to say something we don't say nearly enough. Thank you, Mr. President. You were a great president, a president our children could and did look up to. No one's going to say that about the current occupant of the White House. What we know about this president is if he's given 4 more years, he'll be what he's been for the last 4 years. A president who takes no responsibility, refuses to lead, blames others, cozies up to dictators, and fans the flames of hate and division. He'll wake up every day believing the job is all about him, never about you. Is that the American you want for you, your family, your children? I see a different America, one that's generous and strong, selfless and humble. It's an America we can rebuild together. As president, the first step I will take will be to get control of the virus that has ruined so many lives. Because I understand something this president hasn't from the beginning. We will never get our economy back on track. We will never get our kids safely back in schools. We'll never have our lives back until we deal with this virus. The tragedy of where we are today is it didn't have to be this bad. Just look around. It's not this bad in Canada or Europe or Japan or almost anywhere else in the world. And the president keeps telling us the virus is going to disappear. He keeps waiting for a miracle. Well, I have news for him. No miracle is coming. We lead the world in confirmed cases. We lead the world in deaths. Our economy is in tatters with Black, Latino, Asian American, Native American communities bearing the brunt of it. And after all this time, the president still does not have a plan. Well, I do. If I'm your president, on day one, we'll implement the national strategy I've been laying out since March. We'll develop and deploy rapid tests with results available immediately. We'll make the medical supplies and protective equipment that our country needs. And we'll make them here in America, so we will never again be at the mercy of China or other foreign countries in order to protect our own people. We'll make sure our schools have the resources they need to be open, safe, and effective. We'll put politics aside. We'll take the muzzle off our experts so the public gets the information they need and deserve. Honest, unvarnished truth. They can handle it. We'll have a national mandate to wear masks, not as a burden, but as a patriotic duty to protect one another. In short, we'll do what we should have done from the very beginning. Our current president has failed in his most basic duty to the nation. He's failed to protect us. He's failed to protect America. And my fellow Americans, that is unforgivable. As president, I'll make you a promise. I'll protect America. I will defend us from every attack, seen and unseen, always, without exception, every time. Look, I understand. I understand how hard it is to have any hope right now. On this summer night, Let me take a moment to speak to those of you who have lost the most. I have some idea how it feels to lose someone you love. I know that deep black hole that opens up in the middle of your chest and you feel like you're being sucked into it. I know how mean and cruel and unfair life can be sometimes. But I've learned two things. First, your loved one may have left this earth, but they'll never leave your heart. They'll always be with you. You'll always hear them. And second, I found the best way through pain and loss and grief is to find purpose. As God's children, each of us have a purpose in our lives. We have a great purpose as a nation to open the doors of opportunity to all Americans, to save our democracy, to be a light to the world once again, and finally to live up to and make real the words written in the sacred documents that founded this nation, that all men and women are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, my dad was an honorable, decent man. He got knocked down a few times pretty hard, but he always got back up. He worked hard, and he built a great middle-class life for our family. He used to say, Joey, I don't expect the government to solve my problems, but I sure in hell expect them to understand them. And then he'd say, Joey, a job is about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it. I've never forgotten those lessons. That's why my economic plan is all about jobs, dignity, respect, and community. Together we can and will rebuild our economy. And when we do, we'll not only build back, we'll build back better. With modern roads, bridges, highways, broadband, ports and airports as a new foundation for economic growth, with pipes that transport clean water to every community, with 5 million new manufacturing and technology jobs so the future is made in America, with a healthcare system that lowers premiums, deductibles, drug prices, by building on the Affordable Care Act he's trying to rip away, with an education system that trains our people for the best jobs of the 21st century. There's not a single thing American workers can't do. And where cost doesn't prevent young people from going to college and student debt doesn't crush them when they get out. With a child care and elder care system that makes it possible for parents to go to work and for the elderly to stay in their homes with dignity. With an immigration system that powers our economy and reflects our values. And with newly empowered labor unions. They're the ones that built the middle class. With equal pay for women, with rising wages you can raise a child on, a family on. And yes, we're going to do more than praise our essential workers. We're finally going to pay them. Pay them. We can and we will deal with climate change. It's not only a crisis, it's an enormous opportunity. An opportunity for America to lead the world in clean energy and create millions of new, good-paying jobs in the process. And we can pay for these investments by ending loopholes, unnecessary loopholes, and the president's $1.3 trillion tax giveaway to the wealthiest 1% and the biggest, most profitable corporations, some of which do not pay any tax at all. Because we don't need a tax code that rewards wealth more than it rewards work. I'm not looking to punish anyone. Far from it. But it's long past time the wealthiest people and the biggest corporations in this country paid their fair share. And for our seniors, Social Security is a sacred obligation, a sacred promise made. They paid for. The current president is threatening to break that promise. He's proposing to eliminate a tax that pays for almost half the Social Security. without any way of making up for that lost revenue, resulting in cuts. I will not let that happen. If I'm your president, we're going to protect Social Security and Medicare. You have my word. One of the most powerful voices we hear in the country today is from our young people. They're speaking to the inequity and injustice that has grown up in America. Economic injustice, racial injustice, environmental injustice. I hear their voices. If you listen, you can hear them too. And whether it's the existential threat posed by climate change, the daily fear of being gunned down in school, or the inability to get started in your first job, it will be the work of the next president to restore the promise of America to everyone. And I'm not going to have to do it alone, because I'll have a great vice president at my side. Senator Kamala Harris. She's a powerful voice for this nation. Her story is the American story. She knows about all the obstacles thrown in the way of so many in our country. Women, black Americans, South Asian Americans, immigrants, the left out and the left behind. But she's overcome every obstacle she's ever faced. No one's been tougher on the big banks and the gun lobby. No one's been tougher in calling out the current administration for its extremism, its failure to follow the law, its failure to simply tell the truth. Kamala and I both draw from our families. That's where we get our strength. For Kamala, it's Doug and their families. For me, it's Jill and ours. I've said many times, no man deserves one great love in his life, let alone two. But I've known two. After losing my first wife in that car accident, Jill came into my life. She put our family back together. She's an educator, a mom, a military mom, and an unstoppable force. If she puts her mind to it, just get out of the way. She's going to get it done. She was a great second lady, and I know she'll make a great first lady for this nation. She loves this country so much. And I'll always have the strength that can only come from family. Hunter, Ashley, all our grandchildren, my brothers, my sister, they give me courage. They lift me up. While he's no longer with us, Bo inspires me every day. Bo served our nation in uniform. A year in Iraq, a decorated Iraqi war veteran. So I take very personally the profound responsibility of serving as Commander-in-Chief. I'll be a president who will stand with our allies and friends and make it clear to our adversaries the days of cozying up to dictators is over. Under President Biden, America will not turn a blind eye to Russian bounties on the heads of American soldiers. Nor will I put up with foreign interference in our most sacred democratic exercise, voting. And I'll always stand for our values of human rights and dignity. I'll work in common purpose for a more secure, peaceful, and prosperous world. History has thrust one more urgent task on us. Will we be the generation that finally wipes out the stain of racism from our national character? I believe we're up to it. I believe we're ready. Just a week ago yesterday was the 3rd anniversary of the events in Charlottesville. Close your eyes. Remember what you saw on television. Remember seeing those neo-Nazis and Klansmen and white supremacists coming out of fields with lighted torches, veins bulging, spewing the same anti-Semitic bile heard across Europe in the 30s. Remember the violent clash that ensued between those spreading hate and those with the courage to stand against it. And remember what the president said when asked? He said there were, quote, very fine people on both sides. It was a wake-up call for us as a country. and for me, a call to action. At that moment, I knew I'd have to run, because my father taught us that silence was complicity, and I could never remain silent or complicit. At the time, I said we're in the battle for the soul of this nation, and we are. You know, one of the most important conversations I've had this entire campaign, it was with someone who was much too young to vote. I met with 6-year-old Gianna Floyd the day before her daddy, George Floyd, was laid to rest. She's an incredibly brave little girl. And I'll never forget it. When I leaned down to speak to her, she looked in my eyes and she said, and I quote, "Daddy changed the world. Daddy changed the world." Her words burrowed deep into my heart. Maybe George Floyd murder was a breaking point. Maybe John Lewis's passing the inspiration. But however it's come to be, however it's happened, America's ready, in John's words, to lay down, quote, "the heavy burden of hate at last," and to end the hard work of rooting out our systemic racism. You know, American history tells us that it's been in our darkest moments that we've made our greatest progress, that we found the light. In this dark moment, I believe we're poised to make great progress again, that we can find the light once more. You know, many people have heard me say this, but I've always believed you can define America in one word: possibilities. The defining feature of America: everything is possible. That in America, everyone, and I mean everyone, should be given an opportunity to go as far as their dreams and God-given ability will take them. We can never lose that. In times as challenging as these, I believe there's only one way forward. As a united America, united in our pursuit of a more perfect union, united in our dreams of a better future for us and for our children, united in our determination to make the coming years bright. Are you ready? I believe we are. This is a great nation. We're a good and decent people. For Lord's sake, this is the United States of America. And there's never been anything we've been able to accomplish when we've done it together. The Irish poet Seamus Heaney once wrote, "History says, don't hope on this side of the grave, but then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. This is our moment to make hope and history rhyme. With passion and purpose, let us begin, you and I together, one nation, under God, united in our love for America, united in our love for each other. For love is more powerful than hate. Hope is more powerful than fear. And light is more powerful than dark. This is our moment. This is our mission. May history be able to say that the end of this chapter of American darkness began here tonight, as love and hope and light join in the battle for the soul of the nation. And this is a battle we will win, and we'll do it together. I promise you. Thank you, and may God bless you, and may God protect our troops.
Woo. Well, bruh. I mean, I got to give him points for, stamina and commitment and trying to cover all the bases. He said, let me cover all the bases. And he started with Ella Baker, so I wasn't mad at that. I mean, it's a powerful move. Right. And, he kept true to a number of opportunities to really identify various groups of people of color, indigenous people, African Americans, so on and so forth, which he didn't have to do, given, he could have tried to sort of move along and not deal with that. He got to workers. He tried to cover all his bases as best he could and sort of combine policy with emotion. But it was exhausting in another way. I mean, that I felt like, okay, maybe 5 minutes less I would have gotten the point. What were you thinking, Cornel? And we don't need to talk too long about this because I'm getting ready for hitting the hay. But
we'll have time in subsequent gatherings and things, though. But as you say, he started with Ella Baker, and anytime you start with Ella, you can't be Pat Boone. You better be Curtis Mayfield. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's not Curtis Mayfield. No,
he ain't no Curtis though. So that, and I think many of us were behind Bernie and so forth. It's like we were going to a concert to see Prince and the Revolution, and Lawrence Welk showed up with his bubbles with Biden. But it's clear that he's been a very wonderful father. He's been through some very tough times, and so on that very personal level, he's got a decency that's undeniable.
Yeah, he does. That's true.
There's no doubt about it. I've only met him once, and he's a very kind brother and so forth. But again, we're talking about policy. We're talking about courage. We're talking about a consistency. He said he wanted to fight for human rights, no matter what. So we're going to see what he does on the Palestinian question. Will he meet that test? He says he wants fairness over privilege. Now, we're going to see what corporate privilege, oligarchic privilege, plutocratic privilege. We're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
And then he starting with Ella Baker. Now, she's a revolutionary. He's no revolutionary at all. She was a revolutionary all of her life. She died fighting for the independence of Puerto Rico, as well as the issue of poverty. I didn't hear him mention poverty.
No, he did not.
He mentioned that word one time.
Yeah, he just talked about struggling and hard work and keeping a job. And he tried to talk about increasing the wages so that people, he indirectly addressed the conditions that produce so much poverty, but no. And he didn't mention mass incarceration either.
He didn't mention the new Jim Crow and the mass incarceration at all. But of course he couldn't, because, he's the architect. He's one of the major architects of the whole system.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to bring attention to that. I can understand that.
Right.
But you give people a chance to change. I don't believe that anybody is defined solely by their past, but the past is something they got to come to terms with.
Right.
Absolutely. But we shall see. As we've said before, he's at the moment, he's going to be the one that we have to try to push over the line against Trump. But at the same time, we got to tell the truth about Biden, his past, his present, as well as the future that he could be evolving. We shall see.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And they worked hard, and it's a complicated terrain, and I think COVID will have helped us if we can get this, Trump out of the White House. COVID may be the tipping point that did it, because
absolutely
that's such a disaster, an unmitigated disaster. And Biden had some, I felt that was some of his strongest ground was, trying to restore, the belief in science and experts, and to have a plan and a policy that's intentional and, not leaving people to die pretty much. So we'll see how we can.
We shall see, but
we got a lot to see.
Time with you, these 2 hours or so.
It's always a pleasure, and only with you, Cornel, would I spend 2 hours listening to this.
I know what you mean. Same with you.
Oh, only with you.
Always a joy just in dialogue with you.
Yes, it's always a pleasure. It was a joy, regardless. And I, just my own sleepy self, is happy that Joe Biden has finished speaking. But that's just because I'm ready to be done. But we'll come back to it, as you say. We will be coming back to it.
So I want to just
I will, Cornel. I just want to say thank you very much to Dwayne Gladden and the team at the Real News Network for their production support tonight. They brought that magical feed in so we could actually see what was going on. And I want to remind everyone who's watching to please hit us up on social media, and don't forget to subscribe to The Tightrope and on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube, where our page is called The Tightrope. So good night, everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Take care now.